and view this after the fact is welcome to do so. So the recording process has started now. Okay, well, thank you guys very much for coming virtually to our fall membership meeting today. I want to thank our speakers in advance just for hopping on and offering their perspective on transit issues here in Utah. So by way of introductions, let's just go ahead and kind of go over our agenda. So first of all, my name is Curtis Herring. I am the Executive Director of the Utah Transit Writers Union, for those of you who do not know. So for members out there that are listening, and if you have questions, always feel free to reach out and contact me in order to get your questions answered. That'll be at the end of the presentation if you want to scribble that down. But let's talk about today's agenda really quick. So first of all, yes, we'll be doing our welcomes and introductions. Also, I'll be talking about our chapters and how to start one, as well as our nominating convention, which will be coming up roughly this time in October. Then we will be hearing from the Wasatch Front Regional Council. Hugh and Lauren have been kind enough to join us to talk a little bit about the Wasatch Front Regional Council, what they're working on in transit issues. We will also be hearing from Mike with the Utah Rail Passengers Association, talking about statewide statewide train service and some of the advancements that have taken place there. And then we will be closing with Jaron from UTA. Will be also speaking to us today. So fantastic group of people. Thank you all for joining us. And then we will just be kind of concluding with that and taking it from there. But let's go ahead and just dive right in. As I said, for the people that are just hopping on, this meeting is recorded, so no naughty words, or if you do, make sure they're at least creative. So again, my name is Curtis Herring. Oops, already jumped ahead. My name is Curtis Herring. I am the Executive Director of UTRU. Joining us is Mike Christensen, who is also on our executive board, as well as being part of the Rail Passengers Association. We have some various other members that are kind of starting to trickle in. I haven't seen them come in, but we have a 5-member board right now. Chris Dowd, Austin Whitehead. Oops, sorry, I'm getting distracted by letting people in. Austin Whitehead. We've also got Randy Atkin and John Pearson are currently filling our board. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but if you are interested in becoming a board member, we strongly encourage you guys to sign up. We have a form at the end, which we'll talk about for upcoming elections, but we are especially, though all people are welcome, we're especially looking for women, minorities, and people outside of Salt Lake County. So if you are any one of those, I would especially encourage you. UTRU is a statewide organization. And so as such, we want to make sure that we are statewide and we represent everybody. So we'll keep that in mind. We'll talk about that a little bit more. During the presentation, if you have any questions as well, please feel free to stop and ask. As far as our speakers are concerned, they will have their main presentations, and there will be an option for a Q&A right at the end of each of their individual presentations as well, if you want to ask those questions. So let's go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes of our meeting. I want to talk about UTRU chapters and how to start a UTRU chapter. One of the things, as I said, is that UTRU very much is a grassroots organization from the ground up. We represent all of Utah, but we cannot be everywhere at once. And so one of the ideas behind the chapters is that these chapters are very much the eyes and ears of the organization and really focus on those grassroots events. So for example, we've been talking with the University of Utah looks like they're going to be our first chapter as we start to put things together, but we really want to make sure that we are representing everyone. And so, like I said, they are the eyes and ears and the source of our advocacy. One of the ideas that we've already had floating around, for example, is a bus stop census. So is it just a pole in the ground? Does it have a shelter? Does it have benches? Does it have shade? UTA may have some of this information, but these are people that live and work around the area. And so these chapters are focused on any sorts of things. It can be based off of geography or the type of transit. So for example, if you use Front Runner, or if you use the Loop up in Logan, or if you use a particular line or Vanpool or what have you. It can also be a common interest. So that can be gender, that could be race, that could be the ski bus, right? It could be a lot of different things. We really want to make sure that we're keeping chapters open and available to anybody as long as it is related to transit. Now, you're not going to be doing this alone. UTRU is going to be providing ongoing support for those groups. We'll be giving you social media access, outreach, advocacy suggestions. You'll get your own landing page on the UTRU website so that people can find you more easily. So we will be giving you structural support. We're not just going to throw you out to the dogs if you are interested in starting a chapter. We want to make sure that we support you and we will be here for you as a formal organization, but you guys would really be in the ground focusing on the issues that you want to focus on. We would just offer suggestions more than anything else. So if you are interested in starting a chapter, go to utru.org/start-a-chapter. Hopefully not too difficult to remember, to forget, I should say. Feel free to take a look there. There's a form that you'd have to fill out. It's a 2-page form. It's a lot bigger because we include a lot of extra information on there, but the form itself is not too bad. Get started, get it to us, and we'd be happy to work with you. I'd be happy to work with you to get a UTRU chapter started in your area. Next thing I want to remind you guys of is our annual nominating convention. So UTRU is going to be holding its annual nominating convention this coming October 15th at 10 a.m. It will be held virtually, much like this. So you don't need to wear. You can wear your sweatpants if you want. We're not gonna shame you for that one. The convention is going to focus on the nomination and election of officers and UTRU board directors. We'll also be talking about any sort of chapters that have formally come together. We will also kind of break out and allow people to kind of talk about that as well. We encourage anyone, like I said, to run for office, and we would particularly like to encourage women, minorities, and those outside of Salt Lake County to apply. Now, one thing that you do need to know is that in order to vote or become a member of the board, you do have to be a due-paying member of UTRU. So the vast majority of people on this call probably are not, and that's okay. You're still a member, but in order to vote, you do have to pay dues. Now, we try not to make it too high of a barrier. What we like to say is that annual dues, so once a year, is only $5 or however much it costs you to spend transit on a day. So, for example, I live in Bountiful. I take Front Runner from Bountiful to Ogden and Ogden back to Bountiful. That's $8 a day for me. So my dues for the year would be $8. It's obviously an honor system, but you do need to make sure that you're paying those dues if you want to vote in the election or run. But we try not to make it too high of a barrier for you. Just make sure that you're involved. And so, yeah, for more information on how to nominate yourself, as well as how to become a board member and the rules associated with that and for the convention, feel free to visit bit.ly/UTRU_OCT_22 for more information. So with that, we are going to go ahead and start going into our speakers for the rest of the day. I will also, like I said, give my contact information at the end if you have any questions about what we just discussed. But with that being said, I am happy to hand it over to Hugh Van Wagner and Lauren Victor of the Wasatch Front Regional Council. They have a presentation here today, so I will stop sharing my screen for now once I do that, and we will hand it over to you guys.
All right, thanks, Curtis. Now I want to make sure that my screen is presenting. Does everybody see that?
I do see that, yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, I really appreciate being with you here this morning, and to all the members of UTRU, appreciate the invitation. And Lauren and I will just talk about, introduce the Wasatch Front Regional Council, what we do, and a little bit about the regional transportation plan that we are in the last year of, and talk about connections to transit and transit itself a little bit, and give you some more resources to dive into, and then if anybody has questions. So we'll just jump in here. Let's see, make sure this is working. Boom. So the Wasatch Front Regional Council, we work on building consensus and enhancing quality of life, like everybody, I suppose, right? But we do that by developing and implementing visions and plans for a well-functioning multimodal transportation system. Some of our roles that we do our best to play is convening, bringing people together amongst different agencies, different jurisdictions, and figuring out best ways to move forward. We definitely do have a lot of technical experts on our staff, and feel like people can come to us for that technical information or help. definitely are a lot of planners and trying to look out into the future about how all of us get around collectively in our region, and then help implement those plans that we have put in place through some funding programs that we have. Our geographic area that we serve, you can see there's sort of two roles that we play. The Wasatch Front Regional Council is an association of governments, or an AOG, and also a metropolitan planning organization. So as an AOG, we help Salt Lake, Davis, Weber counties, as well as Morgan and Tooele counties. And then as a metropolitan planning organization, it's Salt Lake, Davis, Weber, and the southern portion of Box Elder County. And really what that is, we provide assistance to all of these, but depending on the money that we are using for that, we can't use that, especially the programming money we have. It's isolated a lot to the MPO area, the metropolitan areas, when it comes to construction funds, and those can't be applied typically to the AOG, the Morgan and Tooele areas. I get confused all the time, but I know the money thing is what defines it for me. As far as our organization, this is obviously a year old, this community structure you're looking at, but our council itself does have 19 voting mayors and county elected officials that are appointed by the county CO, the COGS, councils of governments, and our transportation partners have a couple of voting members. It's still Mayor Jeff Silvestrini is the chair of Mill Creek, and we have a joint policy committee you can see over on the left-hand side of the screen that consists of our other transportation partners, Utah Transit Authority, Utah Department of Transportation, the state of Utah, different things. And then we do work in the economic development side of things. Sort of three things that we focus on: economic development, transportation, and land use, and how they all come together. And different committees throughout. One of the things, our two main committees underneath the council are the Transportation Coordinating Committee. And Mark Shepard in Clearfield, mayor there, is the chair, and our Regional Growth Committee is Mayor Don Ramsey in South Jordan. So those two committees handle. Transportation Coordinating Committee is largely looking at programming money for construction projects and informing the council about those decisions and recommendations. Very much on the sort of building side, if I could say that, and then the Regional Growth Committee more on the regional planning side of things and making recommendations to the council from there. Then right there in the middle is the Active Transportation Committee that tries to deal with anything biking, walking related in the region. Current chair is Mayor Troy Walker of Draper. So underneath those two, Transportation Coordinating Committee, or TRANSCOM, and the RGC, we do have technical advisory committees broken up into different geographic areas. Salt Lake Valley is one, and then Ogden-Layton area is another in both of those. And on the TRANSCOM side, that's made up typically of city engineers, and on the RGC side, typically made up of city planners. So as mentioned, with our committees being made up of elected officials, we do work a lot with Utah League of Cities and Towns, Utah Association of Counties, and any of our government affairs work, and work often up on the Hill. We have a team that does a lot of policy work, making sure, again, that the cities that we represent and the counties we represent have a coalition to talk specifically about transportation issues, and working with our other partners as anything comes up during the legislative session. And just like many organizations, we do have a bill tracker and hold, I believe it's weekly meetings up on the Hill in the morning, breakfast Thursday mornings, for people to come and talk about specific issues or bills that affect our membership, and working to pass good legislation according to our mayoral and elected officials representation. One of the big products that we work on and have had for a long time is called the Wasatch Choice Vision. And as I mentioned earlier, it sort of has these three elements to it: economic development, land use, and transportation, and trying to weave them together, understanding that they all affect one another, and if they're only dealt with in isolation, then you're not understanding the full picture of how they can complement one another and really, again, improve that quality of life within our region. There are 10 goals that our council has set up. I handful of years ago. You can see there on the right-hand side. I won't go through all of those just for sake of time, but try and do everything we can, or everything we're involved with, running them through those goals and making sure we're meeting them to the best of our abilities. Obviously, some we're more engaged in than others, but definitely do our best to screen everything we do through these goals. So on the transportation side of things, which is primarily where Lauren and I work in the Long Range Planning Group, the one of those three elements, we do a 4-year planning cycle. So every 4 years, we're required federally to have a regional transportation plan that looks at it in a minimum of 20 years into the future. And that plan consists of, at this moment, bicycle projects, roadway projects, transit projects, and tries to take into consideration land use. So one of the requirements federally is that the projects that we're planning for in the next 20 plus years, that there's a budget associated with it, both a financial budget and an air quality budget. So we have to determine the revenues that are projected and anticipated against the cost of those projects and fit them into 3 different phases. You can see the phases we're working on now for the 2023 to 2050 plan. Phase 1 from 23 to 32, phase 2 from 33 to 42, and phase 3 from 43 to 50. And again, based on the prioritization of a project, what revenues we have, they get put into these buckets. And then once we have all the projects identified, we do have to do an air quality conformity report, which says we get a certain amount of, I'll call it an air quality budget or an emissions budget from the state of Utah. And based on the calculations and the models that we run, have to say the projects that are being planned for will not exceed that air quality budget. And that is definitely something that the federal government watches us very, very closely on. And now, with that, I'll just turn it over to Lauren to talk a little bit about some of the transit projects in the current working draft of the Regional Transportation Plan.
Thank you. Okay, so there's a lot of lines. This is just kind of a current snapshot of our planning area and the transit projects that are the draft transit projects. So right now we have 71 projects, and those, I don't have the modes on here, but they range in terms of what transit investment that each project is. So we have commuter rail projects, we have light rail, we have streetcar, bus rapid transit, and then we have core routes. And core routes are a type of enhanced bus, and they have, they're basically like a BRT, but they don't have the exclusive lanes. So they'll have enhanced stations, higher frequencies, certain technology that can be implemented to make them a little more reliable, like transit signal priority. And currently we have about $8 billion of transit needs. So of the 71 projects, $8 billion, it's quite a lot of money. And then what you're looking at right now is the different phasing, the lines that are different colors. They're different phased needs and financially constrained. So there's a little bit about what Hugh talked about, and I'll go into kind of how we got those different phases and how we identified those. But the projects on the map right now are the product of community workshops. So from input from community members and planners and engineers, and then also local plans. And we work in conjunction with our transportation authority and our transit authority. So all of these projects are kind of the culmination of the region's vision. So that's kind of how we got to those. So Hugh, if you could go to the next slide, kind of go over how we got those projects and how we phase them. So here's our phasing criteria for the transit projects. And we associated all of them with one of our Wasatch Choice goals. The things that we look at for the transit projects are ridership, kind of how it performs through our travel demand model, and how that interacts with our real estate model. Sorry, Hugh, what is it? The
real estate market model.
Market model, yes, thank you. Yep. So from that, we get outputs of ridership. And then we also, with help from our analytics team and then other folks on my team as well, we looked at access to opportunities and kind of if these projects are able to improve access to opportunities. And then we also looked at that with an overlay of our equity focus areas, and kind of if those are able to improve that access. And then we've also looked at improving access to activity dense areas. So if projects are in areas with high jobs and residents per square miles kind of deal, they got more points. We also looked at traffic congestion and if these transit projects were able to address that at all. And then also we looked at the walk network connectivity and kind of if people were actually able to access the transit routes and projects. And then we also looked at if these projects were completed environmental studies and corridor studies and other kind of general plans and incorporation in that. So we took all of those considerations, scored the projects, and that looked at kind of the need of the project. And then we also went into, we have to fiscally constrain it. So that was the other kind of phasing that we have, but this is how we got to the need of the project in the region and how we were able to identify those. You go to the next slide. And then, so this kind of looks at that phasing criteria and where those projects landed. And the light blue is the needs. So where we phase them on the needs side, this is kind of the amount of money that would be needed in order to complete those projects. And then the dark blue is the actual revenue available. So as you can see, we have more transit needs than actual revenue available. So that's kind of, we have to work with our community planners and engineers and our transit authority and our transportation authorities to kind of prioritize these projects. And we get a lot of feedback in our community workshops and kind of, yeah, prioritizing these projects. So this is kind of how we break them up into phase. And that's all I've got for that. It's kind of high level.
Hey, Lauren, one real quick question when it comes back to the map here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember if you said this, so I'm sorry, apologies if you did. But this does not include any local bus service, correct? Core route is not the same as local bus, is that right?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so one thing to note too is there's some areas on the map that look a little bare, like they might not have a lot of planned transit investment. But this, we work really closely with the Utah Transit Authority, and they have a 5-year service plan. And in that, there's local bus, and there's also microtransit with Via on Demand. So there's other areas. So on this far right map, in the kind of southwest Salt Lake County area, it looks pretty bare, but they have an active and current microtransit area that serves that place. So yeah, it can look a little bare in some areas, but that doesn't mean there's no transit investments. So yeah, this is just the regionally significant projects will be in our plan.
Okay, thanks for the reminder to me on that. So jumping to the active transportation, and there's definitely I want to emphasize a complementary network between active transportation or biking and walking projects and transit, right? Transit is the best walk extender, is the way I've heard it put, and I definitely believe in that. And we want to increase these systems' cohesion. Compared to Lauren's map, you can see on the left is Box Elder and part of Weber counties, and Weber and Davis County in the middle, and then Salt Lake County on the right. And there are a lot more lines here. And one of the reasons for that is that these are primarily biking projects, and that network is just really immature compared to some of our other transportation modes. And we, in the Region Transportation Plan, we are a little bit more liberal than Lauren is at this point in time with what we consider a regional project in trying to get these networks established and built. And so a lot of these projects, actually the vast majority of them, come from local active transportation plans that then we work with communities to have them have those projects put into the regional transportation plan. And this is, again, a snapshot right now of the projects in red are phase 1 projects, the projects in blue are phase 2 projects, the projects in purple are phase 3 projects. And you might be asking, well, there's 3 phases but 4 colors, and the orange ones are those projects that there's no funding for within the 2050 timeframe at the moment. We won't adopt our 2023 plan until May of next year, so we're still working through this and massaging it. This is a snapshot of where we're at the moment. But 766 projects over 1,200 miles at a cost of not quite $1.3 billion. So where we're at the moment. Similar to what Lauren went through, have a prioritization criteria that looks at those Wasatch Choice goals, see what applies. One of the things I want to highlight there is the second blue box, quality transportation choices. And there's a very specific line item that improves connections to transit and to shared mobility services. So does a project access existing or planned transit stations or stops scored in that area? Here's our needs against revenue available. As I mentioned, it's a snapshot. So right now you can see there's a bit of an anomaly in phase 2. Look, we have all this money and we don't have as much need. Well, that'll shift around, as we move projects, as we better understand where money's already being planned on being spent, what's being programmed, and bringing more projects into that phase 2. But again, not quite as egregious as far as needs against available revenue as the transit side, but definitely more needs than available revenue. I should say one of the things that we do with this planning process, this is the first time we've tried to financially constrain or fiscally constrain the bike side of the plan. So, it's a little bit new territory. And we do have a history in our region of building bike projects with roadway projects. We don't have a big history of a lot of standalone active transportation projects. So a lot of the needs here are actually being picked up in the cost of a roadway project. And we're trying to account for that and pay attention to that and take advantage of roadway projects that can build good bicycle facilities as those projects are getting built. Again, just to talk bicycles and transit for a minute. Those of you on the call, since you're in the Transit Riders Union, you'll probably recognize what this map is. So it's the region that we serve, at least along the Wasatch Front in the NPO area. And the dots are, little green dots are the track stations, and the big darker dots are front runner stations. And then the green lines behind them, that's our current planned bike network. You can see anything that's highlighted in blue, this is something that's within a mile of those stations. So a bike project within a mile of those stations, trying to, again, provide access to those stations the best we can. Now, all these dots now are the bus stops in the system, and all of the AT projects within a mile of those bus stops. So you see pretty darn good coverage within a mile of getting people to a transit station or stop that will help them get where they need to go. Again, that bike or walk extender. Just back to the overall process, Lauren talked about how we prioritize our needs, fiscally constraining and putting them into those buckets. And anything in that phase 1 is quite important for the programming side of things. And WFRC also has what's called the Transportation Improvement Program with what's called the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality, the Surface Transportation Program, and the Transportation Alternatives Program, where we get money from the federal government that we program locally. And any of those projects that we program have to be in phase 1 of the plan. So there's a whole website on the Transportation Improvement Program. They have a map of what projects are being looked at, and there are new projects being selected every year. It's also important, the plan in those phase 1 projects for what's called TIF active and TTIF first last mile. So the state has state transportation dollars in the form of what's called the Transportation Investment Fund and a newly created Transit Transportation Investment Fund. If I understand it correctly, it's essentially sales tax dollars, state sales tax money that's coming in to fund these programs. And out of those Transportation Investment Fund and Transit Transportation Investment Fund, there are 2 categories, one called the TIF Active, which focuses on bicycle and other type projects, and then on the transit side, first last mile projects, right, improving access to those stations. specific amounts of money. And anything in the phase 1 of the RTP is hoped to be an automatic nominee for those 2 funding efforts. So if the community is willing to provide a match, they have a great chance of getting that project built with state dollars, which are easier to use than federal dollars, just because there's a lack of red tape that are associated with the money that we program compared to state dollars. So again, important thing to be in the plan to help get these projects funded, built. I do have a website for the Regional Transportation Plan. Again, it's in progress. We're at the tail end of our 4-year process, but May of 2023 is where we're looking to get that adopted by our council and provide it to the federal government. And you can follow us along there if you're interested in where we're going. We are having a bunch of workshops this fall for people. And our plan also rolls into what's called Utah's Unified Transportation Plan. It's, again, an effort between the Department of Transportation, the Transit Authority, and all of the metropolitan planning organizations. And you can see on the left how that all comes together. We've done this for a number of years. We're fortunate to be in a state where we collaborate pretty well. We don't always see eye to eye, but we're all sort of focused on the same goals, and people are willing to talk and work with one another and put it into this unified transportation plan. And it's a very helpful thing for our state decision makers to make financial decisions based on what we know we need and the amount of money we have going into the future, again, to improve our network on all modes for all the folks that we live with. That's, sorry, a little bit of a long-winded presentation. I wasn't sure how familiar people would be with what we are and what we do. Hopefully that's a good overview. And again, Laura and I are happy to take any questions that folks might have.
Yeah, so does anybody have any questions? I know I have one. So I'm just curious. Oh, Logan, you want to get in there? I'll let you go first. Go ahead.
Okay. One of my questions was, you said that you make up that shortfall in the needs versus investment or revenues for active transportation, mostly by incorporating those into roadway projects. How do you make up that gap for transit projects? How do you fill that gap?
I'm going to let Lauren answer, but really quickly, so we don't make it up necessarily. We're just saying that there might be a lot of needs that aren't reflected in the numbers because they're already in the roadway project side. So sorry if I misspoke. It wasn't intended to say we make it up that way. Just informing you that we try and roll in AT projects into road projects when we can. So Lauren, how do you make up for that shortfall on the transit side, which is significant?
Yeah, so we have an unfunded phase. And so we will have projects that will be in a needs-based phase or identified as a need, but there is no identified money for them. So they'll still be included in our plan, but they will be in our unfunded phase. And that is then where people have to get creative in the implementation of those projects, finding other sources, kind of advocating for those projects, trying to get people to allocate money towards it. So yeah, there's trying to get creative, but they stay in our plan as unfunded. And so then additional studies can happen, things like that.
Yeah, it gets tricky. I mean, the roadway side also has a bunch of unfunded needs that are there, and sometimes the state has a big budget surplus and can put money towards important projects that maybe don't have, or maybe move them up a phase or something like that, which then frees up money in that later phase. So it's pretty evolving and fluid, and there's some really smart people on the money side of things that are trying to make the best decisions and move projects around when they can. Between the MPOs and the DOT and whatnot. But it's also a tool to say, there are policy levers that can be enacted as far as different sales taxes and things like that, or, how do we improve in our, maintenance of projects, keep our life expectancy and service up. But Lauren's right, it's just to say, unless something changes, we're not going to have these projects when they're needed, right? And I think that's the case. Well, it is the case across, you know, all transportation sectors, which is when you have to come down and get really focused on the priorities and come to agreement on those.
All right, Gray, you have your hand raised.
Hi, yeah, thank you. And I appreciate the presentation. I just had a question about how transit needs are determined in each area. I just moved to Kearns from downtown Salt Lake, and the transit infrastructure out here is wildly different. There's not really a lot of consideration out here to connect the west side Kearns and West Valley to the east side of the valley. I work in Cottonwood Heights specifically, and I know that demand isn't really there as much. Specifically, the demand is probably just me. So I was wondering how, you know, for Kearns specifically, I'm also on the planning committee for Kearns. How is that determined for, like, is there any plans for active transportation from Kearns to the east side, and not just to track stations, but all the way to the east side, perhaps even to the benches? Are there any plans for that, or something like a Jordan River Parkway or Jordan River, you know, how that it's an unbroken trail and a greenway from east to west?
You want to do the transit first, Lauren, and then I can talk about bike projects?
Yeah, so transit needs, there's a lot of things that go into consideration. One thing is we look at travel patterns, kind of where people are going, what they're traveling for, and that kind of helps inform the type and level of service that's needed. And then also we look at land uses. So land use is really, really tied to transit and making transit successful. And I will say the east-west connections are something that I think come up in every discussion that we have around transit internally and externally. And it's something that we're working to address on the transit side. But yeah, I mean, high level, yeah, we look at land uses and kind of transit, land uses that are conducive to good transit and actually getting people to where they need to go. And so that's kind of, that's why we value our community workshops and getting that feedback and actually hearing on the ground, like how people are traveling. And we also have data that we look at as well. But so it's a mix of data and kind of real-time stories and listening to folks. So Hugh, I don't know if you want to answer the AT side.
Yeah, and so Gray, hopefully you're aware that Kearns right now is involved in an active transportation plan of your own, and there's a consultant that's been picked, and we help fund those projects along with UTA and Salt Lake County and the DOT, and so always trying to take a look at those local plans and want them to be aware of what other communities around them have planned so they can make those connections. And biking in and of itself, really trying to shift towards the members of our population, our communities that are not going to go on big long rides necessarily. You know, there might be commuters that do that, but we'd really love to shift the number of people that are currently driving places, especially less than 3 miles, to a different type of transportation mode. And it gets a little bit interesting because depending on the services in your community, you can either stay within your community, or you have to go outside of that community. So what we're trying to do is have each community focus on their own plan, obviously be aware of their neighbors and the connections that come out of there, and then stitch together sort of longer projects. And I can give an example, not directly related to Kearns, but 3900 South / 4100 South that stretches the length of the valley, almost literally, range to range. And this is a corridor. It's not state owned. It does traverse, but does come near a track station in Midvale, along 39th. Does cross all the freeways without having an interchange there. So it's much friendlier for people biking and walking than freeway interchanges typically are. Hits the Jordan River Trail, and the plan is to try and make a multi-use path along that whole corridor. So just like you were talking about, a Jordan River Parkway, but east-west, at least in that portion. So that's something that the communities along there in the county are actively engaged in trying to get implemented. It's really early, but it's a project I think could be a great template for others in the valley. One of the real challenges for east-west connectivity is the lack of just streets that go there. Kearns is a little bit unique in that you have a pretty darn good grid system within Kearns, but it falls apart outside of Kearns, and we're all forced to get on these, big collector arterial roads to get anywhere regionally, rather than having a local grid network that allows us to make those trips without getting on the big roadways. So that's one thing that local land use authorities have decision on, and how they build their communities and their streets and their design standards. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into, or help to answer your question, I hope.
All righty. Well, thank you both very much for your time. I'm sure if people have more questions for you guys, they can reach out to the website. But yeah, I wanted to thank you guys again very much. So let's go ahead and move on to our next speaker. This is Mike Christensen. He is with the Utah Rail Passengers Association. And then we will also be hearing from Jen Robertson from UTA after that. But Mike, if you're ready, I can go ahead and hand it over to you.
Okay, just a moment. Let me get my presentation up and running. And I'm assuming that you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, just a second. Okay, you should see my presentation now.
We do, yes.
Okay. This is going to be a presentation about the Utah Rail Passengers Association, obviously, which is a partner group of the Utah Transit Riders Union. And I wanted to start off with saying that I actually got rid of my car 5.5 years ago. And so I rely very much on transit to get around, but I am also very much in the camp of being very interested in more biking access. I recently bought an e-bike, which I am loving, and I bought it right after Pioneer Day in July, and I've already put over 500 miles on it. So I'm loving it, and there's lots of possibilities connecting bicycling and transit. But to talk more about the Utah Transit Riders Association and I just mixed up organizations. I meant Utah Rail Passengers Association. I realized a while ago that there was some unmet needs. Now, we do great in Utah in terms of having a wonderful airport where we just got a new terminal. And that connects us to more than 100 destinations every week. We also have great public transit along the Wasatch Front. We've got over 80 miles of commuter rail, over 40 miles of light rail. We have 2 miles of streetcar, which hopefully we can get expanded sometime soon. And we also have 11 miles of BRT in the Provo-Orem area, and also additional BRT system coming online in Ogden next year. But the problem is the transit needs of Utah do not stop at the boundaries of our transit districts. We have UDOT that does a great job making sure that highways connect everywhere in the state. And we have transit districts throughout the state. However, we don't have a whole lot of connectivity among the various transit districts, and also going into rural areas within the state. and that presents a problem. And when we look at how we might institute intercity passenger rail in the future, my time as a grad student at the U, I came to the conclusion rather quickly that Utah lacks the institutional capacity to pursue passenger rail because it's not something that can be done by transit districts, because these routes extend beyond the boundaries of transit districts, is something ideally that UDOT should be pursuing. Unfortunately, UDOT, this isn't something that UDOT has a whole lot of experience with. So with that in mind, when I finished my master's degree at the U in 2018, I created the Utah Rail Passengers Association, which we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We also are doing business as the Utah RPA and also as Link Utah, which is kind of the trademark for the proposal that we'll get to here in a moment. And we are a very small organization. I am the executive director. I also serve on our board of directors. And joining me on the board is Grant Allen and David Mann, both of whom are professional planners here in Utah. And we're right now keeping things very streamlined and basically just having 3 board members because that is what the law requires in Utah. Funding dependent, we'd like to expand our reach and have more board members, but right now we're keeping things pretty simple. And the map on the left there is the main proposal that we are trying to move forward. The thin blue line that crosses Utah going east and west, that's Amtrak's California Zephyr route that operates once daily going between Chicago and San Francisco. And the gold highlighted portion between Ogden and Provo is UTA's Frontrunner, which operates hourly service or better during rush hour. And the red lines are the ones that we are pushing for, which would utilize existing Union Pacific tracks to connect north to Logan and south east to Moab and Grand Junction and southwest to Cedar City. And we are looking at speeds going up to 80 miles per hour. Although the trains that we would most likely acquire would be capable of going 125 miles an hour if the sections of track were upgraded to allow that. The service pattern that we're looking at is 3 round trips a day between Cedar City and Logan, and 3 round trips a day between Grand Junction and Logan. And one of the big issues is St. George. Washington County is actually one of the most populated counties in the nation to lack a rail connection. That's something that the state of Utah really needs to start looking into addressing. So this proposal would utilize bus service to connect passengers between Cedar City and St. George to start off with, and hopefully we would start off a conversation about how to better connect St. George. And later phases, looking at the needs of neighboring states, it would be great to have a connection to Las Vegas and an additional connection to Reno and to Boise and possibly Idaho Falls, even up into Butte, Montana and beyond. And also have an additional connection to Denver that would cross southern Wyoming and go through Cheyenne. And one of the other big aspects of this is looking at having rural bus service that would actually connect to all of Utah's 29 counties and provide statewide transit coverage. And back at the end of July, representatives from Amtrak actually came to Utah and talked about some of the ideas that they have and some of the possibilities that we could be doing. So Amtrak very much recognizes the need to connect to surrounding states. And one of the big issues that, well, pretty much every nonprofit faces, but definitely the Utah Rail Passengers Association. Right now, we are trying to get funding because we would love to do annual education programs to be able to expose more people to the benefits of passenger rail. And I would love to have, if somebody gave me $5 million today, because I would be able to go out and do the study that would need to be done before we could proceed and tap federal funding. Although this $5 million probably wouldn't come directly to the Utah Rail Passengers Association. It would probably be in partnership with other organizations. But one of the baby steps that we could do on our way in that direction is to do a socioeconomic benefit study of the Link Utah proposal and be able to know what the economic benefits would be. And one of the things that I recently, it dawned on me that we really need to do is to convene an intercity transit stakeholders working group and be able to bring everybody to the table and figure out how we need to proceed in the future. One of the big things out there is the fact that the infrastructure bill, the IIJA, has $66 billion for intercity passenger rail that's available, mostly going to states to do these projects. And unfortunately, Utah is not in a very good position to look at trying to grab onto that funding. But to give you more ideas of what these different funding pools might entail, I would love to have education funding to be able to sponsor travel for a class on intercity passenger rail, which would include a trip on Amtrak. And that would most likely be done in conjunction with the Wasatch Transportation Academy that was recently started. So I would also love to be able to sponsor research involving intercity passenger rail and rural transit in Utah, and also be able to sponsor student travel, student and faculty academic travel on Amtrak. So students and faculty would be able to tap us for funding to go do different things around the country where they would normally likely be flying. They could possibly take Amtrak. And the socioeconomic benefit model that I mentioned before is something that's already been developed. It's been developed by the National Rail Passengers Association in conjunction with the Trent Lott National Transportation Center at the University of Southern Mississippi. And it relies heavily on socioeconomic data provided by IMPLAN. And basically what these models do is, well, we often get way too focused on how much it costs to do a transportation project. And we don't really take the time to quantify what the economic benefits are to communities. And we see huge economic benefits, especially to transportation departments, because when you move people out of cars and onto trains, it saves a ton of money on wear and tear. And there's also savings coming from reducing pollution and reducing crashes. There's also economic activity generated by having better transportation alternatives. There's also new travel that's induced, people that wouldn't have traveled had the trains not been available. And looking around the country, we usually see at least 3 to 4 times the economic benefits than what it costs to subsidize the service. In some cases, we've seen it go as high as 8 or 9 times what the subsidy is. But yeah, we'd love to have this study performed on Utah and be able to go to policymakers and say, hey, yeah, this would actually save the state money. And as I mentioned before, I would love to be able to convene an intercity transit stakeholders working group. The convener and key partners would be Utah Rail Passengers Association, along with the Federal Railroad Administration and Amtrak. But it would bring together, obviously, UDOT and the metropolitan planning organizations around Utah, and also the associations of government. And well, those groups on the screen are kind of the ones that decide what gets in the plan that will eventually be funded. And then the others on this list are those that will be providing service, which are Utah's transit districts and other transit providers, the host railroad, which would be Union Pacific. And I would also want to include other governmental and advocacy organizations. And the idea is to get everybody at the table and present them with the reality that there's federal funding for being able to expand passenger rail, and get everyone to understand that we need to organize better if we are going to take advantage of that funding. And there's one thing I need to add on this before we go to questions, is that I have heard that UDOT is considering sending an expression of interest to the Federal Railroad Administration about doing intercity passenger rail. I am going to have a meeting this week with one of the deputy directors of UDOT to find out more details on that, and also basically tell UDOT that I would really want to make sure that the Utah Rail Passengers Association and other organizations like UTRU are included in these discussions. But yeah, with that, I will open it up for questions.
Okay, do we have any questions for Mike? Not seeing any. Let's see. Oh, go ahead.
Got a question. So when other states have done something like this, I guess I'm just trying to, what do I imagine in my head? Would it be we kind of sponsor extra Amtrak service throughout our state, or would it be like its own Utah branded Link Utah locomotives kind of thing?
It would be sponsoring additional Amtrak service, but since we'd be sponsoring it, we would usually make it clear that Utah is sponsoring it. And examples from other states include the Amtrak trains usually have the logos of the state DOTs that are involved on the trains, and it usually, mentions that on the schedules. So yeah, like it's a good opportunity to basically show that this is a partnership of multiple organizations. And I would also want to make sure that also that Union Pacific gets acknowledged as a partner too. Often we forget about the role of the nation's freight railroads in providing passenger service.
All right, any other questions for Mike? Gray, got your hand up?
Sure, yeah. Hey, thanks, Mike. looking at the map of the proposed rail lines, would the one to the Uinta Basin be using the proposed Uinta Basin railway line?
One of the issues with the Uinta Basin railway line is that it doesn't, well, as currently proposed, it gets within a few miles of Duchesne, but it doesn't go anywhere else that's near any of the cities in the Uinta Basin, which really makes it difficult to make running a passenger train on it useful. That's actually one of the things that I've tried to reach out to the people that are proposing the Uinta Basin Railway, and well, one, they have told me that they're not interested in doing any types of extensions to make it useful for passenger rail, but yeah, it would require a pretty significant extension to get it further to Vernal, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something that if the Uinta Basin Railway were built, I would definitely want to push for an additional extension to make it useful for passenger rail.
Great, thank you. And what is the general pushback or resistance? What are some of the arguments that are used in resistance to building out a comprehensive rail line?
There are, I've talked to some rural legislators and rural county commissioners that are very ideologically opposed to transit because it is subsidized. And I have tried to talk to them about the fact that highways are also subsidized. And I have often received responses from them that they don't actually believe that highways are subsidized. So that's where I've gotten some pushback. The bigger issue is not so much pushback, but just the fact that when you look at who would be responsible for fostering this, it's not really in anybody's wheelhouse. Because like I mentioned before, it's not something that transit districts can do because they have limited geographic extents. And it's not something that like the Wasatch Front Regional Council could do because of the same reason. So it really needs to be UDOT, and UDOT really doesn't have anybody that is responsible for this.
Can I ask real quick if there's been any consideration of getting, you talked about rural areas, about getting the 7-county infrastructure coalition involved?
I've tried reaching out to specifically the 7-county infrastructure coalition, and they're not interested in anything that's transit related at all. In fact, they are amongst the people that don't believe that that have the ideological opposition to transit. And I've reached out to a lot of mayors along the routes, and it's a totally different story with mayors because they tend to not see things along lines that are nearly as partisan, and they definitely see the benefits of having additional transit service. And like a lot of the issues that we see in rural Utah is that there's a lot of rural poverty that we kind of have ignored, and people can actually live fairly cheaply in a lot of the rural areas. But the flip side is that there's a lack of opportunity there. So increasing the public transit to serve rural areas would really help, because having grown up in a small town in Idaho, I realized the lack of services in rural areas and how often you have to travel outside of the small town that you live in to be able to access services. So there's a huge, this would really relieve rural communities of a lot of those burdens.
Great.
And it looks like we've got a question from James Larson.
Yeah, let's take one more question from James, and then we'll be moving on to Jaron from UTA after that. So go ahead, James.
Hi. I guess I just have a question about the use of the Union Pacific right of way. Has there been pushback from Union Pacific about the idea of running passenger services on that route and of like potentially trying to get the trackage upgraded to the higher standard?
Right. There's always pushback from Union Pacific and the other freight railroads because they have become extremely profit driven, and basically we would just be reimbursing them for the costs incurred for allowing Amtrak to use their tracks. But we're like, we experienced this week with the potential strike that there's a lot of pushback against the freight railroads for not taking care of their employees like they should, but there's also pushback for not allowing adequate passenger access and not even allowing adequate freight access for small shippers. So basically it's going to be an issue to get that from Union Pacific. But if we're able to offer them an enticing package of improvements to their tracks that we'd be willing to pay for, we're usually able to twist their arm enough to get them to go ahead with it. But another thing is they actually pushed for the creation of Amtrak back in 1970. So they're actually obligated by law to allow Amtrak access to their tracks at a reasonable cost. So it's always a fight with the freight railroads, but they always have come around in the end to be able to allow access.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mike. We appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And yeah, we appreciate the update. So, all right. Well, then we are going to pass it on to our final speaker, Jaron Robertson with UTA. So, Jaron, if you are ready.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Jaron Robertson. I'm the Acting Planning Director at the Utah Transit Authority. I'm actually going to turn my time over here in just a moment to Eric Callison, who's our Manager of Service Planning. But we'll quickly note, we also have Joey Alsop on the call, who is our Service Planning Supervisor. And then we have David Stedman on the call, who's our Rail Service Planner, who will be able to answer questions today. I don't want to take too much thunder from Eric's presentation, but in light of everything you've heard today, I just want to acknowledge, we actively are partners and work with WFRC, as you heard this morning, on the Long Range Transit Plan. Also with our partners to the south, Mountain Land Association of Governments, when it comes to representation of Utah County for their regional transportation plan. Under our planning department, we have both our long range strategic planning departments and our service planning efforts. And again, you're gonna hear more from Eric on this, but recognizing that UTA is in the process of developing a long range transit plan and our 5-year service plan, that's going to talk a lot more about some of the issues you didn't quite get to hear about with WFRC. And so with that, why don't we go ahead and just turn it over to Eric now for his presentation, and then we'll be available to answer any questions anybody has.
Right, thanks, Jaron. Can everybody hear me? Good, good. I passed the first test. Now I'm going to share my screen. I don't know if you've seen the Tumblr post that somebody did music notation. Can everybody see my screen? So see if that works. Okay.
Looks good.
Very good.
All right. So I just have a few things we'll go through. We did get some requests from Curtis before the meeting about some stuff to talk about. I'll touch on those things, and then we'll have some time for questions. I'll move fairly quickly through the slides, but then I'm happy to go back at any point if you have a couple questions. First of all, there's some interest in our recent August change day, which is the biggest change day we've had in a long time. Part of that was because we made a number of emergency changes at the beginning of the COVID adventure that have now become permanent changes. And we also made some pretty significant changes in Salt Lake City as part of the implementation of the Salt Lake City Transit Master Plan. We have had a rough ride with some of the people in this area. You may have seen the avenues in the news recently. I can't talk too much smack about the avenues on this call because Jaron lives there and there's lots of really nice people in the avenues, but there has been some local opposition to some of the changes. We are pleased to report, though, that as a result of the changes, we have preliminary ridership numbers. They haven't been cleaned yet, but we do seem to be up quite a bit on weekdays, Saturdays, and Sundays already, which is very encouraging. We feel very good about the new connections across the city that we've been able to create, as well as tapping into some of these really strong transit markets with some additional frequency. The other big change this year is the Wildcat shuttle. You can kind of see in this picture in the middle here, that is the exclusive right-of-way that the Wildcat shuttle is using. This is, you can call this the first phase of OGX, which is Ogden's new line that will open next year. And we'll continue to operate on this segment of the line as well. This bus is coming every 5 minutes. OGX as a whole will come every 10, and this will overlay to make it every 5 minutes right through the Weber State University campus. And we are already, again, based on some preliminary information, carrying over 4,000 boardings a day just on this little tiny line, which is very encouraging. I have to update my bar charts to include a route that carries over 200 passengers per hour. At least until next year when we open the full line. But we're getting a lot of good use from this line rather. A lot of positive feedback from the students that have been using it, as well as some suggestions about what we could do better. We actually have had to pull another bus out to meet the demand. Even at 5-minute service, it was not quite enough to handle all the people that were waiting on the platform. So we've been running slightly less than 5 minutes, every slightly less than 5 minutes. And that's very good to see this service take off so quickly. And then this is just apologies to Curtis. He's already seen this, but we have a few slides that kind of talk about our service planning process. I know that there's different degrees of familiarity with what we do within our customer base, within the people that use the system. But just to kind of quickly go over what we do for fun, that there's a lot of expectations on transit. People have a lot of desires for more transit. We need to save the environment. We need to solve traffic. We need to serve people with disabilities and other vulnerable populations. We need to keep the angry mobs happy, not just the avenues. We get angry mobs in many different parts of our system, depending on what's going on. And we do need to keep our friends at the state legislature happy as well. Since they are the ones that fund us. And sometimes the state legislature and the angry mob and the environmental groups and the congestion mitigation all want different things. And so we have to have a way of making those calls or a way of prioritizing what makes sense for us to do next or to do immediately. Another thing that's important in our process is leading versus lagging metrics. Probably the main thing that people know about UTA or want to know when they're asking how is UTA doing, they want to know how many people are riding, and that makes sense. The problem with just measuring ridership is that it's a lagging metric. By the time we've measured it, it's already happened. So we may get into a situation like this where you have your ridership that suddenly dips, and then we don't know why, and so we're continuously playing catch up. The other thing is what we might call the latent demand problem. Kind of a chicken and egg thing. If you have these 4 hypothetical transit routes that all carry different numbers of people a day, we'll frequently have conversations with people say, well, if you would just put more service on this route D here, more people would ride it. And so it's kind of like, well, is nobody riding it because it's not a good transit market, or is it not a good transit market because UTA is not putting enough service there? And so that's why we have a job. Is so that we can help make those kind of decisions and work with a variety of community stakeholders and partners on what is the best course of action going forward. So a couple of things that we look at as leading metrics. We have what's called a transit propensity index. There will not be a quiz on this. This is just for your edification. But we do look at a variety of factors to produce this. We look at the population and employment density nationwide. That is the single biggest determiner of transit ridership, is what is the density around the transit line. We do emphasize minority and low-income populations. We look at zero-car households, favorable market segments. A lot of the data comes from either the American Community Survey or the census. Favorable market segments comes from us. We do, every couple of years, we do what's called a market segmentation study. Excuse me, we're just wrapping one up now, where we survey both riders and non-riders of the system to ask, okay, so what are the reasons that you ride? What are the reasons that you don't ride? What are the reasons that you don't ride more? And that can include anything from, well, the bus simply isn't available at the time I need to catch it, or I don't feel safe. I don't feel like the system is clean. It just doesn't match my lifestyle. I don't like transit on an ideological basis, like Mike Christensen alluded to a few minutes ago. We also look at our street connectivity. If somebody lives at the end of a cul-de-sac, it's more difficult to serve them with transit than if somebody lives in the middle of a grid of streets. And we can produce, this is just a heat map of Salt Lake County and Utah County. Apologies to anybody in Weber and Davis County that's on the call, that we did not include your area, but we can look at this. This is just a sample image of what that kind of looks like. And these areas that are shown kind of in this bright yellow is where we have the highest transit propensity in our system. You can see that's kind of downtown Salt Lake over to the U of U. You can see Rose Park, Fair Park, Glendale, Poplar Grove, West Valley quite a bit. We do have some hot spots in Kearns, places like Taylorsville, Midvale, Holiday. And then it kind of drifts out from that. In Utah County, we definitely have a strong concentration in Provo and Orem, particularly around BYU. A lot of these hotspots here are student housing, which is very dense and low income. But you can see there's quite a bit of demand also just throughout the city of Orem. And then as we go a little bit further out, we don't have no demand, but we definitely can see where the demand kind of drops off. One kind of hotspot that you can kind of see right here is also in the Lehigh area with Thanksgiving Point. That's been a little bit tough to suss out during the COVID adventure because a lot of those people have not been working in the office. But we can look at all of this. We can say, when we look at a route, does it make sense to have a certain level of service on it? So here I brought back Weber and Davis County with these routes here. And again, you don't have to memorize any of this. But if we look at the level of service, we need to have a strong enough transit propensity index to have 15, 30, or 60-minute service or a flex route. Or we need to have enough passengers per hour. So TPI is transit propensity index, PPH is passengers per hour. And so if we look at these routes in the 600s, so this is Weber and Davis County, we can say, does this route have a strong enough transit propensity index? In the case of a lot of these routes, actually, no. These are not super dense areas. Once you get outside of downtown Ogden and like downtown Clearfield and Layton. But we do get a decent amount of ridership. This is pre-COVID information right here, but pre-COVID, we were getting a decent amount of ridership on all of these routes that said, okay, well, it makes sense for us to continue running these routes, but we may want to look at some of these and analyze if we're really meeting the market appropriately. That was a big driver behind the Salt Lake City Transit Master Plan, behind things like Route 1 that now goes between Rose Park and Fair Park, down south through downtown, down South Temple to the university. That's saying we had a very good transit market there, but the service that was there before maybe wasn't the best service to meet that market. And so we're already seeing a strong response from people in the area, and that's a good sign that we're on the right track. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to look at it and see what improvements we can make in the future. This is a very colorful diagram. I want to be very real with everybody here. I think you can handle it. That, even when we look at our service now versus prior to COVID, there's a number of routes that simply aren't running that we've decided to discontinue for whatever reason. There's a few routes that are suspended. There's a number of routes that are not running the same level of service as they were prior to COVID. I just want to let everybody on this call know that we are very aware of that. It doesn't make us happy necessarily to say we're running a lower level of service on some lines. But we do, we are keeping track of that. We've been keeping track of how many people are on the bus on a daily basis since the start of COVID. It's no longer quite so urgent because we're not trying to promote physical distancing within a bus, but we do still look at where we have elevated loads on different routes, and we try to respond accordingly. Like many industries, we are in a very tight labor situation at UTA, and I know that that isn't, that's not an explanation, or that's not like an excuse for us not running the level of service that we want in each place, but it has led to us having to make some tough calls and make some decisions to keep the greatest amount of service out for the greatest amount of people. And that's really, if we ask, well, what can we do to improve the level of service on this route? The main answer right now is we need to get more people in the door. We are excited. Just before COVID happened, we did have additional sales tax passed in Salt Lake and Utah counties. The state and different county level jurisdictions are considering the fifth or the fifth quarter, which is the additional sales tax increase that was specified in the Transit District Act in 2018, 2019. So there's funding out there, and now we need to get people in the door to operate that service that we would fund. So that's not my wheelhouse. I can't speak to everything that we're doing. I know that we are offering some hiring incentives now. We've done an aggressive marketing campaign to certain segments of our population that we feel like will be more receptive to the bus operator job. It's certainly not for everybody, but if you know somebody, feel free to recommend that they come work for UTA as a bus or a train operator, because we will put them to work right away, immediately. We've got lots of work for people to do. I will also note down here at the bottom, we have expanded our on-demand service quite a bit during this time as well, partly to replace routes that were underperforming before COVID, or that the travel market really kind of evaporated during COVID, as well as just to improve our coverage overall. For example, in Tooele County, we were running 2 flex routes within the city of Tooele itself, and then an additional flex route that connects Tooele County to Salt Lake County. But that meant during the middle of the day, there was really only coverage in kind of downtown Tooele, a small part of Tooele. And with the on-demand service, we're able to expand that to cover Tooele, Stansbury Park, Grantsville, and connect between all 3 of those areas. So we've vastly improved our coverage, the number of people that have access to transit service through that on-demand service. And that's very encouraging to us. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jaron. We've already seen a significant improvement in that area as well in terms of the number of people using it. I think we've already roughly doubled our daily ridership versus the flex routes, which is a good number to brag about, but even more important is what that means, is that it means that more people are able to access services, and they're able to make the trips that they need to make without, either having to have a car or having to rely on somebody to give them a ride everywhere. And so that gives people more independence, more opportunities. That's really what's the most important thing. When we talk about ridership, it's important to note that each one of those data points is a person, and we want to make their lives better. This was mentioned just a minute ago. We do have a couple of planning efforts going on right now. The 5-year service plan is an ongoing effort. It updates every 2 years. Excuse me. And we are preparing to present to our Board of Trustees at the end of this month. It's actually in just a few days. On September 28th, we'll present the draft 5-year service plan network to the Board of Trustees. At that point, it will become a public document. So anyone is welcome to get online and comment on that. You can also call in, email us. You can send us a letter through the post if you would like. We do still sometimes get comments via snail mail. But there's any way that you would like to comment on that, we welcome your feedback. We'll be making revisions to the draft network through the remainder of this year, and we expect that our Board of Trustees will approve the new 5-year service plan in February of 2023. And then we're also working on the long-range transit plan that will probably come out sometime next year. We want to make a couple of distinctions because there is, as our friends at WFRC mentioned, there's way more transit demand than we have funding right now. So we have a couple different levels of planning that we do. The 5-year service plan is financially constrained. This is what we can do. I would say it's also resource constrained. So this is what we can do with the money that we have. This is what we can do with the workforce, with the vehicles, with the restroom locations that we have. It does include local service, innovative mobility, as well as some upcoming projects such as OGX that's planned to open in August of 2023. The long-range transit plan is going to be kind of a bridge between this 5-year service plan, which is very practical, very closed off in terms of future expansion, and what we've seen in the WFRC and MAG long-range plans. So this would include, this is maybe service that we don't have funding for right now, but if there's a new source of revenue, we could apply it. It does include local service. The WFRC does not include local service in their plan because they're focused more on the regionally significant projects. Our long-range transit plan at UTA will include local bus service, include innovative mobility, and we'll include these innovative mobility, meaning like van pool, microtransit, anything that's not a scheduled bus service. It will include our upcoming projects like OGX. It will also include a number of future projects that should be coming out a little bit later, sometime next year, and we'll be taking lots of public feedback on that as well. And then just to wrap up, we did have a conversation with a couple of people earlier about what makes feedback useful. And so I have a few thoughts. Doesn't mean you have to do this. We will, of course, take your feedback however it comes. But the thing that can make your feedback more useful is specificity. A lot of the feedback that we get is not very specific. It says you should run more on Sundays, or sometimes people will just call in and say UTA is corrupt. And you are welcome to share that feedback. It's just not very easy for us to take any action on it, especially when we're working within a constrained environment. So the more specific you can be about, I wish there was more service on Sunday on Route 470. That's something that's much easier for us to say, okay, we can look at Route 470, we can see what we can do. And also anything that you can give us from your experience. The bus is late, so I missed my transfer, is much more useful feedback than you should run more often on Sundays. Because that allows us to do some root cause analysis. It allows us to zero in on what the problem is and take any action. And then we do get a lot of claims that are not backed up by very much data in our feedback that we receive. The value of my house just fell by $200,000, or there's hundreds of people that have tried calling you and you haven't done anything about it. And I get that there's a lot of strong emotion behind what goes into transit planning in the transit system. And I have a lot of strong emotions about transit myself as a regular transit rider. I probably agree with a lot of the sentiments that are expressed in these comments. Sometimes people will call me and I'll say, no, I agree with you. We definitely need more service over here. But any information that you can bring to the table is helpful. Like we have a new office that's opening up and it has 1,700 employees. That's a much better data point for us than, oh, well, there's tons of people. There's just tons, and I think sometimes people call us to get things off their chest, and that's fine. People are allowed to do that. It's just hard for us to do very much about it unless you can put a little bit more firepower behind it. And this last one, put it in front of my neighbor's house instead. We've dealt with this a lot in the avenues. You are welcome to object to having a bus go down your street or having a bus stop in front of your house, but we may not be able to do anything about it, because if we moved it to your neighbor's house, then they would just say, well, put it back in front of the other person's house. And then either you two fight it out, or we just keep moving back and forth forever until the end of time. And so we will, if we get feedback like this, we'll probably grit our teeth and say, well, this is the best location as far as an accessible boarding location, or this is the best access to the intersection or to the neighborhood. So it's going to stay here. We're sorry that you object, but it's going to stay. If there's something that you can tell us, again, with some data backing that up, why it would make sense. Well, I feel like the bus, the bus is coming too close to the fire hydrant. At some point, it might clip that. That kind of thing has happened in the past. That's something that we could look at or act on, but can you please put it on this other street instead of my street, is not very actionable feedback for us. And I'm not saying that I hope that nobody on this call would feel singled out by any of this. That's absolutely not my intent here. I would like to have this conversation between Utah Transit Riders Union and UTA be as productive as possible. And I don't want people to feel like, oh, I submit feedback all the time and UTA just doesn't do anything about it. I'd love to make sure that everybody understands, this is why we can or can't do something about this particular issue, or this is kind of the situation, or maybe if we had a little bit more information, we'd be able to take more definite action on something. So anyway, that's what I've got today. I'll go ahead and open it up for questions to the group.
Eric,
and we can go back to any slide. Go ahead, Jaron.
Yeah, do you mind if I add one more thing on the feedback? As Eric noted, and I did too, we're working on the next iteration of our 5-year service plan and the long-range transit plan. And again, I don't need to repeat what Eric said, but that 5-year service plan is financially constrained, and it really does lay out our plans over the next 5 years and how we're going to implement service. We're really going to deploy an extensive engagement process as we develop those plans. And I think this is the real opportunity for the public to get involved and weigh in on what our plans are over the next 5 years. Because I'm assuming most of this group knows we do change service 3 times a year, with most major service changes happening in August. When we go out for public engagement during that process, it's looking at, and Eric can explain this better than me, but we're looking at issues with that specific route, but you're not going to see generally major service changes like alignment changes and other issues. So the feedback process as part of these planning efforts is so important to us because it's really, we're making some big decisions over the course of the next several years. So I want to make sure that, we'll put information out there, but this is an opportunity for this group to help us get the word out and participate in that process themselves.
Yes, and please tell all your friends to comment too. Not just like anybody and everybody. Please, comment on our stuff.
And UTRU is definitely wanting to and planning to engage with UTA when those times come. Do we have any questions from the group? Gary.
Hey, this is Gray. Sorry. Yeah, I just
Gray,
had a
I'm
few
sorry.
questions. You're all right. It happens. A couple things that I just have a couple questions. I gotta say, like your responses on Twitter have been great, and I find that a lot of people are sending like feedback on Twitter, and then your UTA is responding, which is pretty great. It saves time from like going into the website trying to find where the comment form is and everything, and I like the reactiveness. So I am out in Kearns, and I am new out here. I have a couple of questions about the connectivity between east-west and west and east. Seems like a lot of the transit lines are based around north-south. And then it seems as though there's a lot of transit out in West Valley, Kearns, South Jordan, West Jordan and everything. But it seems to hit a border or right at the tracks line, and it doesn't continue east, forcing folks like myself to make 2 different connections. And sometimes those connections, if there's late, it'll expand. If there's any sort of delay in the bus service, then it extends that transit by an hour or so. I did hear that at one point there was a max line planned for 54th, and I know UTA still owns some of that land out over there. Is that still like something that's a possibility, or increased max and tracks lines? And is that in the long range plan?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Specificity, friends. That's what we need. So the 54th and 47th are still on WFRC's long range transit plan for some significant improvements. As far as like some exclusivity, some transit priority, so transit signal priority type of stuff, similar to what's happened on 3500 South. In the immediate future, we do intend to increase the frequency of service on 54th as well as 62nd. That's within the scope of our 5-year plan at the current time. And the capital improvements are probably a little bit further out. That kind of stuff will definitely be in the long range transit plan next year. You will see those routes on our 5-year service plan in a couple of weeks. But it's probably, you know, we'll run a little bit more frequent service, which doesn't solve the travel time issue, but hopefully helps, because then if you do miss a bus, at least you don't have to wait as long for the next one. And then actually improving the corridor is definitely still on the table, but it might be a few years out.
All right, great. James, you're up next.
Hi. I know you probably get this question a lot, but have there been any like recent updates on the plan to do the strategic tracking, double tracking on front runner to improve service on that? And are there any particular issues with like lack of rolling stock and stuff?
So I'll let Jaron fill in anything that I leave, but yeah, we've received some funding for that already, and I think we're already starting on like the design, planning to do that in the next couple of years. That we do need some additional funding from the state before we can finish the project, but I believe we're ready to start in the next couple of years. Jaron, you can clarify anything on that. It's kind of outside my scope, but.
You know, we're working with the Utah Department of Transportation on this project, really defining several strategic areas where we can double track the system so that we can look towards 15-minute peak service and 30-minute off-peak service. As Eric mentioned, the state has put a lot of funding into the program. We need a significant amount of more money, and so we'll be looking towards federal grants, which we're in the process now of applying for, will help close that gap. But upon receiving those, you know, we're in, again, close coordination with UDOT and developing plans so that once the funding is in place, we'll be able to move forward and start implementing these improvements to the service, which will improve. You know, we have to look at our signaling systems on the corridor, and then also bringing in new vehicles as part of the project as well.
As far as like the rolling stock, that's something that we'll have to do, but it's not an obstacle at this point. It's just something we'll get to.
Awesome. Mike, you had a question, then I got Daniel after that.
Mine's more of a comment, just saying I live in the greater Rose Park neighborhood, and I just wanted to say that I like the changes. There has been a little bit of an on-time performance issue that hopefully gets ironed out in the next schedule change. Although part of it might have to do with construction on 200 South also. But the additional thing is I would love to see the 205 restored to 15-minute frequency. Hopefully that happens soon.
Yeah, the 205 is at the top of the list right now. That would be the next thing that we would do, is restore 15-minute service to the 205. We expect that to really take off in Rose Park as well, along with Route 1. Thank you for your patience with the schedules. We did our best putting them out there for the first time. You probably will see some schedule adjustments for December and April change day to bring those routes a little bit more in line with what's actually happening on the ground. And yes, we did start off with a detour on Route 1 just for fun. But yeah, as the construction situation kind of calms down a little bit in Salt Lake City, we do expect to see our schedules get a little bit more reliable. And like I say, we'll continue to make adjustments each change day until we kind of get to a place where we feel like we're stable. So.
And Eric, can I add quickly, the 205 is an example that represents a real challenge we have at UTA that Eric's already talked about, and that's operator resources. It really limits our ability to do some of the projects we really want to do. I just want to reiterate, it's a real challenge, but we are actively working on resolving it. It will take a little bit of time.
For the record, it hurts my heart just a little bit every day. The 205 doesn't come every 15 minutes, and the 54 and some of these other routes as well. So, you know, we're very excited about putting that service back just as soon as we're able to do that.
Great. All right, Daniel, you had a question?
Yeah. I've been closely following the Future of Light Rail project and noticed that recently opened up to public survey again with the I'm blanking on the word, the possible idea of where the Orange Line might run. And I'm curious if you know anything more about the timeline of that project.
I've been fielding most of the questions, but I'll defer to Jaron on that one.
Actually, I may have to ask if Joey or anybody else is involved in this one. We may have to get back to you on this one. I don't have.
I'm involved. I'm involved in it. This is Dave, and we're looking about a year.
Oh yeah, Dave's here. Thank you.
Yeah. So basically, right now, getting public feedback, looking what the options are. Is there feedback on where you'd like to see it run?
I've already submitted online that I'm most excited to have a second train that goes up to campus, because that's my daily ride is Murray Central to campus. So twice the frequency right there makes me very excited.
Sounds good. And are you coming from Front Runner, or where are you coming from to go up there?
I live in Taylorsville and I drive to Murray Central.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, it looks like, you know, obviously we'll still have the red line that comes up from Murray Central going up to the University of Utah. Orange line, there's some different possibilities. One of them is taking it right down to Salt Lake Central, so there'd be a direct from Front Runner up to the University of Utah. Most likely Orange line would go over to Research Park, so it'd probably branch off just after South Campus when it gets up there to Mario Capecci Drive.
Very nice. Okay, great. You have one more after that, and I think we'll call it with you. Ray, is there? You raised your hand.
Yeah, sorry about that. So this is kind of speculative as far as Trax line goes, because everybody wants a Trax line. Have you considered something up Fort Union or like a light rail up Fort Union that might connect to something on 78th and the west side? Just kind of an east-west transit for rail.
Go ahead, Dave.
So I know there's nothing on the Future of Light Rail in that corridor right there. I know Sandy City for a while, they wanted to have a connector that would go up. It would be 90th, 94th south and connected to Little Cottonwood. But as far as on UTA's radar, I'm not aware of anything. I think that would be more a bus. And I don't know if Eric, Jaron, if you could speak to sort of what we'd be doing bus-wise on that.
Sure. I mean, we're certainly not opposed to the idea. I think it would just be, you know, we've got some things that we're working on right now, and this would probably have to come after. In terms of the bus service, we have already ramped up some bus service on Fort Union since the beginning of COVID, just because there's a lot of employment there, a lot of people trying to get to their jobs. Route 72 is doing great. At some point, we would want to join 70th and 72nd into the same line, similar to what we've done with the 33, 35 and the 39 a little bit further north. Right now we have the 40-foot bus on the east side and the flex shot on the west side. Eventually that would all become 40-foot bus service. When the ridership gets to that point, that would be a good candidate for 15-minute service as well. And then who knows? You know, there could definitely be something else in the future if we continue to see ridership grow on that corridor or any other part of the system.
And was UTA also involved in the, I'm not sure, but were they involved in the Little or Big Cottonwood Canyon study or Little Cottonwood Canyon study, and how public transit might alleviate traffic farther out from that area, like increased transit on Fort Union? Would increased transit on Fort Union alleviate the traffic up the Cottonwoods?
So yeah, we have been involved in that EIS that UDOT's been working on. We have our own feelings about gondolas versus buses that I will not share here. But we do. It is kind of part of a package. I think there's Fort Union, there's 94th, there's Highland, and Wasatch Boulevard that all kind of wrap into that we would need to kind of increase that whole network in the area. I think Fort Union's part of it. Excuse me. But in order to really kind of mitigate the traffic at the mouth of the canyon, because one of the concerns is that if you put in a gondola, then the canyon's great, but now you've just moved all of the soup to the base of the canyon. And in order to really combat that, we need to have multiple park and ride locations that people can access, which they can use existing track stations. UDOT, as you probably know, is also considering a new parking garage in the area. But we would need to increase our local connections, probably on all of those corridors. Fort Union, Route 72, 9400 South, 94, 220 on Highland Drive. And then we're also exploring Route 4, which currently goes through downtown Salt Lake and goes down Foothill to 39th, extending that further south on Wasatch to make some of those connections that could serve as both a connection from downtown and the U of U to the ski areas, as well as a connection from kind of the southeast part of Salt Lake County to downtown and the U. And whenever we can get a travel market in both directions, we get a transit route that performs much better. So I think there's definitely, we've been having those conversations with UDOT, talking about, we might need a whole entire new light maintenance facility to increase the transit service as much as is necessary for that. And they haven't said no. So more details on that as it develops. That would be a pretty significant investment in transit throughout that whole area.
All righty. Well, thank you very much, you guys. You may not be able to say it, but we'll say it. The gondola is stupid. It should have been the bus. But anyway. All righty. Well, thank you very much for all of our presenters today. Let's just go ahead and wrap up really quick. Let me get my screen up and going. I apologize, just to get my slides going. So again, just as some conclusions and reminders. First of all, again, I do want to thank our presenters. Thank you all so very much. Throughout the meeting, I've been receiving emails from all of them with their slide decks and all of that sort of information. So if you have any further questions, please do feel free to reach out. Also, I want to remind you guys to be sure to start and join chapters. Going back to the whole data and collecting information and actually sending that off to to UTA. One of the things that we are doing and encouraging chapters is to start collecting that information so that we can actually provide UTA and other transit agencies, of course, with actionable information. For example, we just closed our Bikes on Transit survey. So you're going to be receiving, Eric and everybody else, you're going to be receiving our findings on that. But that's just an example. And chapters really are the places where those take place. So please, please, please do consider starting and joining a chapter. Also, just as a reminder again, our annual nominating convention will be on Saturday, October 15th at 10 a.m. And that is going to be held virtually as well. Expect that to be about an hour, roughly, as we hear from everybody that wants to be on the board, as well as anybody that has started chapters. And then finally, as the reminder again, if you want to, please be sure to nominate yourself and check out the convention rules by visiting bit.ly/UTRU_OCT_22. It is case sensitive, just keep that in mind. Or you can just go to the UTRU website and find the event in our events calendar as well. But with that, I just want to give you my contact information as well. Visit us at utru.org, or you can also email me at curtis.herring@utru.org. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and call it a meeting. Thank you all very much for joining us today. Really do appreciate that. And as always, if you have any questions for me or anybody else, reach out. But otherwise, we'll give you your Saturday back. Go play in the rain. Should be a great time. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Curtis. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.